When the townspeople of Cedar Falls thrust their broken girl at Samuel Hartwell for cruel entertainment, they expected the scarred Civil War veteran to either join their mockery or turn away in disgust. Instead, this limping tinker saw something in Clara's haunted eyes that would change both their destinies. A recognition that society's discarded pieces often hold the most precious value. But what happens when two people society has written off as worthless decide to prove the world wrong? The hammer crashed down on red-hot metal, sending sparks flying like tiny stars across Samuel Hartwell's dark workshop. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he worked, even though the October morning felt cold enough to freeze water in the bucket by his door. His strong hands moved the glowing piece of iron back and forth, shaping it into something useful from something broken. Sam wiped his face with a dirty cloth and looked around his small room above Morrison's store. Pots with holes sat in neat rows on wooden shelves. Bent spoons waited in a basket near the window. A clock with no hands ticked quietly on his workbench, somehow still keeping perfect time even though it couldn't show anyone what that time was. 3 years he'd been fixing things in Cedar Falls. 3 years since he'd come home from the war with a leg that didn't work right and nightmares that woke him most nights. The townspeople brought him their broken items and paid him fair money, but they never stayed long enough to really talk. They looked at his limp and spoke to him like he might not understand regular words. That was fine with Sam. He understood plenty. He understood that people threw away things that still had good use left in them. He understood that a dented pot could still hold soup, and a cracked mirror could still show your face. Most of all, he understood that being broken didn't mean being worthless. The church bell rang 8 times, telling Sam that the town was waking up for another day. He could hear horses' hooves on the dirt road below and women calling to their children to hurry along to school. Mrs. Patterson would be opening her bakery soon, filling the air with the smell of fresh bread that always made Sam's empty stomach growl. He picked up a small music box that someone had brought him yesterday. The tiny dancer inside was supposed to spin when you opened the lid, but she sat still and sad instead. Her pink dress had faded, and one of her arms had broken off completely. The person who brought it had said, "Just throw it away if you can't fix it easy." Sam held the little dancer carefully in his palm. Her painted face looked up at him with eyes that seemed to ask for help. He'd seen that look before, in mirrors and in the faces of other soldiers who'd come back changed from the war. It was the look of someone who still had beauty inside but didn't know if anyone else could see it. "Don't worry, little lady," Sam said softly to the tiny figure. "I'll figure out how to make you dance again." He set the music box on his special shelf, the one where he kept projects that needed extra thought and care. Next to it sat a photograph in a cracked frame, the only picture he had of his family before the war took him away and sickness took them. His ma and pa stood stiff and serious in their Sunday clothes, but Sam remembered how they'd laugh together in the evenings after farm work was done. A loud crash from the street below made Sam jump. He rushed to his window and looked down to see young Billy Morrison picking up apples that had spilled from a cart. Billy's face was red with anger, and he was shouting words that would have gotten Sam a switching when he was that age. "Stupid old horse," Billy yelled, kicking at the wooden cart. "Nothing in this town works right anymore." Sam watched Billy storm off toward his father's store, leaving the apples scattered in the dirt. Some were bruised, some were perfect, but Billy had decided they were all worthless because they touched the ground. It reminded Sam of something his pa used to say, "Son, the world's full of people who can't tell the difference between dirty and ruined." The morning sun climbed higher, sending golden light through Sam's dusty window. He lit his small stove and put water on for coffee, the same routine he'd followed for 3 years. Coffee, work, simple supper, sleep when the nightmares led him. It wasn't much of a life, but it was peaceful and it was his. He was stirring sugar into his coffee when he heard something that made his blood turn cold. Laughter was drifting up from the street, but not the good kind that came from joy. This was the mean laughter that happened when people found someone weaker to pick on. Sam had heard it plenty during the war, usually right before something terrible happened. Sam set down his coffee and moved back to the window. A small crowd was gathering near the general store, and their voices were getting louder and nastier by the minute. He couldn't see what they were looking at, but he could hear Billy Morrison's voice rising above the others. "Look what wandered back into town," Billy called out. "Our own crazy Clara." Sam's hands gripped the window sill until his knuckles turned white. He'd heard whispers about Clara before, how she'd left town suddenly 2 years ago, how people said she'd gone simple in the head after some trouble with her stepfather. But Sam had never seen her himself, and he'd figured the stories were just the kind of mean gossip that small towns love to spread. The crowd was getting bigger now, and their laughter was getting crueler. Sam could see them forming a circle around something, or someone, near the store's front steps. His stomach twisted with a familiar feeling, the same sick worry he'd felt during the war when he knew something bad was about to happen to people who couldn't defend themselves. What was he supposed to do about it? Clara Murphy pressed herself against the cold brick wall of Morrison's store, wishing she could disappear completely into the cracks between the stones. The crowd around her kept growing, and their faces showed the kind of excitement that meant trouble for someone like her. She'd made a mistake coming back to Cedar Falls, but she'd had nowhere else to go when the work ran out in the next town over. "Dance for us, Clara," Billy Morrison shouted, his 17-year-old voice cracking with the effort to sound grown up. "Like you used to before you went all crazy." Clara's hands shook as she pulled her torn shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her dress had once been blue, but now it was mostly the color of dirt after too many nights sleeping outside. She hadn't eaten anything but wild berries in 2 days, and her empty stomach made her feel dizzy and weak. "I don't dance anymore," she whispered, but her voice was so quiet that only she could hear it. Mrs. Henderson pushed through the crowd, her fat face pretending to look concerned. "Poor thing," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Been wandering around like a lost animal ever since that business with Harold Wickham. Some folks just can't handle life's troubles, I suppose." Clara's heart started beating fast at the mention of her stepfather's name. Harold Wickham had been gone from Cedar Falls for 2 years now, but the lies he'd told about her before he left still followed her everywhere she went. People believed his story because it was easier than believing the truth about what really happened in that house. "She's been living rough," observed Mr. Patterson, the baker. He pointed at Clara's dirty clothes and tangled hair. "Probably stealing food from farms and sleeping in barns. That's what happens when young girls think they're too good for honest work." Billy picked up a small rock from the ground and weighed it in his hand, grinning at his friends. "Maybe we should teach her some manners. Help her remember how to act right around decent people." Clara looked around desperately for a way to escape, but the crowd had her trapped against the wall. There were too many of them, and they were all bigger and stronger than she was. Her mind started going to that quiet place it went when things got really bad, the place where she could pretend she was somewhere else entirely. That's when she looked up and saw him. A man stood at the window above the store, looking down at the scene below. He had brown hair and kind eyes, and his face showed the same expression Clara had seen on her own face in shop windows. The look of someone who knew what it felt like to be hurt by people who should have been protectors instead. For just a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. The tiny hope that maybe someone in this crowd of cruel faces might actually see her as a person instead of entertainment. The man disappeared from the window, and Clara's heart sank again. Of course he wouldn't help. Why would a stranger risk making the townspeople angry just to protect someone like her? She was nobody special, just a girl with a bad reputation and no family left to care what happened to her. "What's wrong, Clara?" Billy taunted, tossing his rock up and catching it. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just too simple to understand what we're saying." The crowd laughed, and Clara felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes. She wouldn't cry in front of them. She'd learned long ago that tears only made bullies enjoy themselves more. Instead, she tried to make herself even smaller against the brick wall, hoping they'd get bored and leave her alone. "Leave her be." The voice came from behind the crowd, quiet but firm. Clara looked up to see the man from the window standing at the bottom of the wooden stairs that led to his shop. He walked with a limp, favoring his right leg, but there was nothing weak about the way he held himself. Billy turned around, his rock still in his hand. "Morning, Sam. Just having a bit of fun with our Clara here. No harm meant." Sam, that was the man's name, looked directly at Clara when he spoke. "Fun's over now." "Now hold on, Sam," said Mr. Morrison, Billy's father. He stepped forward with the fake smile he used on customers. "The boy was just... I said it's over." Sam's voice carried something that made even Billy take a step backward. Clara could see scars on Sam's hands and a thin white line across his forehead that looked like it came from something sharp and dangerous. The crowd started muttering among themselves, but nobody seemed willing to argue with Sam directly. Clara watched as he limped down the rest of the stairs, each step careful but determined. When he reached the bottom, he held out his hand toward her. "Come on, miss," Sam said gently. "I've got coffee brewing upstairs, and it's getting cold." Clara stared at his outstretched hand like it might be a trap. In her experience, when men offered help, they usually wanted something terrible in return. But Sam's eyes were different from Harold Wickham's eyes, different from Billy Morrison's eyes. They looked at her like she was worth helping, not like she was something to be used. Slowly, carefully, Clara reached out and placed her dirty fingers in Sam's clean palm. His hand was warm and rough from working, and he held hers gently, like she was made of something precious that might break if handled too roughly. "That's it," Sam said softly. "One step at a time." As they walked toward the stairs together, Clara heard the crowd behind them starting to break up. Some people sounded disappointed that their morning entertainment had ended so quickly. Others were whispering about Sam and what it meant for a man like him to take in a girl like her. Clara didn't care what they whispered. For the first time in months, someone had chosen to help her instead of hurt her. As she climbed the wooden stairs beside Sam, she wondered if this was what safety felt like. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Good things never lasted long for girls like her. Clara's hand shook so hard that the teacup rattled against the wooden table like a trapped bird trying to escape. Sam pretended not to notice as he busied himself lighting the small stove in the corner of his workshop. The smell of coal and metal filled the cramped room above Morrison's store, but it felt safer than the street below where angry voices still echoed. "They won't hurt you up here," Sam said quietly, pouring hot water into 2 chipped cups. His words came out rougher than he meant, like sandpaper on wood. Clara sat straight as a fence post in the only chair. Her torn blue dress spread around her like wilted flower petals. Her dark hair hung in tangles over her face, but Sam caught glimpses of bright green eyes that darted around the room like a cat looking for escape routes. "Why did you help me?" she whispered, so soft he almost missed it. Sam's hand froze halfway to the sugar bowl. In 3 years of living above the store, fixing broken pots and bent spoons, nobody had ever asked him that question. Nobody had ever needed to. Because... He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound foolish. "Because I know what it's like when people look at you and only see what's wrong." Clara's eyes met his for the first time since they'd climbed the stairs. In that moment, Sam saw something that made his chest tight. Not the madness everyone claimed lived in her head, but a sharp intelligence hiding behind carefully crafted confusion. She wasn't simple-minded at all. Before he could say more, heavy footsteps thundered up the wooden stairs outside. Sam moved faster than his bad leg usually allowed, reaching the door just as angry fists began pounding on it. "Open up, Hartwell," Billy Morrison's voice boomed through the thin wood. "You got something that don't belong to you." "She's not a thing," Sam called back, surprised by the steel in his own voice. "That girl's been causing trouble since she was old enough to walk." Came another voice, Tom Brennan, the blacksmith's son who was twice Sam's size and half his age. Time someone taught her proper respect. Clara shot to her feet so fast the chair scraped against the floor. Her whole body trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "I should go. This is my fault." "No." Sam moved between her and the door, even though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged animal. "You didn't do anything wrong." The pounding stopped suddenly, replaced by low voices plotting in the hallway. Sam knew that sound from the war men deciding how to break something without getting their own hands too dirty. "There's a back way," Clara whispered, pointing toward a narrow window that led to the roof. "I can climb down the rain pipe. In that dress? You'll break your neck." Sam limped to his tool chest and pulled out a heavy wrench. The weight felt familiar in his scarred hands. "Besides, running just tells them they were right about you." Clara stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "You don't understand. When men like that decide they want something." Her words trailed off, but the fear in her eyes finished the sentence. Sam's jaw tightened as pieces of ugly truth began fitting together in his mind. A new sound reached them, the scrape of metal on metal. Someone was picking the lock. "The storage room," Sam hissed, pointing to a small door behind stacks of broken furniture waiting for repair. "Hide there. Don't come out no matter what you hear." Clara grabbed his sleeve with fingers that felt like ice. "What about you?" Sam looked down at this girl who everyone called crazy, who'd been brave enough to trust a stranger when her whole world had turned against her. Something shifted inside his chest, like rusty gears finally turning after years of being stuck. "I'll be fine," he lied. The lock clicked open just as Clara disappeared behind the storage room door. Sam turned to face whatever came next, the wrench heavy in his grip and his mouth dry as old leather. Billy Morrison stepped through the doorway first, his face red from drinking and anger. Behind him came Tom Brennan and Jake Murphy, the mayor's nephew who'd never worked an honest day but always had plenty to say about other people's business. "Where is she?" Billy demanded, his eyes sweeping the small room. "Gone," Sam said simply. Tom laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Gone where?" "Ain't nowhere to go but down, and we got that covered." As if summoned by his words, more voices drifted up from the street below. The whole thing had been planned, Sam realized. They'd never intended to let Clara leave peacefully. "This ain't about her," Jake said, stepping closer with the confident swagger of someone who'd never been in a real fight. "This is about you thinking you're better than the rest of us. Taking in stray dogs like you're some kind of saint." "I'm not a saint," Sam replied, shifting his weight to his good leg. "Just someone who minds his own business. Might try it sometime." Billy's hand moved to the knife on his belt. "Your business became our business when you interfered with our fun." The word fun hung in the air like smoke from a dirty fire. Sam thought about Clara's shaking hands, the intelligence she hid behind pretended madness, the way she'd known exactly where the rain pipe was without looking. This wasn't the first time she'd needed to escape through a window. "You're fun," Sam said carefully. "Looks a lot like cruelty from where I stand." "Cruelty?" Tom stepped forward, his massive hands clenched into fists. "That girl's been asking for trouble since she was knee-high. Everyone knows what she did to her poor stepfather." "What did she do?" Sam asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. The three men exchanged looks loaded with ugly meaning. Billy's smile turned sharp as broken glass. "Seduced him, of course. Led him on with her wicked ways until the poor man couldn't help himself. Then screamed assault when he tried to make an honest woman of her." Sam's vision went red around the edges. The wrench trembled in his grip as memories of the war crashed over him. The sound of cannon fire, the screams of wounded men, the terrible clarity that came when everything you'd believed about human decency crumbled to dust. "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" Jake blinked in confusion. "Get out," Sam roared, his voice filling the small room like thunder. For a moment, the three men stepped back, startled by the sudden transformation of the quiet tinker into something wild and dangerous. But the moment passed and their numbers gave them courage. "Make us," Billy sneered, pulling his knife free. That's when the storage room door creaked open, and Clara stepped into view holding Sam's largest hammer in both hands. "Nobody's making anybody do anything," she said, her voice steady as stone. "But if you want to find out what a wicked girl can really do when she's tired of running, just take one more step." The room fell silent except for the tick of Sam's old clock and the sound of 4 people breathing hard. Outside, The voices from the street grew louder, more demanding. Time was running out, and everyone in that cramped workshop knew it. But for the first time since Clara had stumbled back into Cedar Falls, she wasn't running anymore. And Sam realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was stand still and fight. 3 weeks passed like pages torn from a book Clara had never dared to read. Every morning started the same way. Sam would wake on his bedroll near the stove. Clara would emerge from the storage room that had become her bedroom, and they would work together in comfortable silence while the town below slowly came to life. But unlike the fearful quiet of their first days together, this silence felt different, peaceful, like two puzzle pieces that had finally found where they belonged. Clara discovered she had a gift for the tiny, delicate work that made Sam's eyes strain. Her small fingers could reach into clock gears and music box mechanisms that had stumped him for months. More surprising, she seemed to understand the language of broken things without being taught. "You feel what's wrong with it, don't you?" Sam asked one Tuesday morning as Clara carefully straightened the bent spring of a pocket watch. She paused, her cheeks turning pink. "That sounds foolish." "No," Sam said firmly. "I do the same thing. Metal talks if you know how to listen." Clara's whole face lit up with a smile that transformed her from pretty to beautiful. "I thought I was imagining it. The way different breaks have different moods." It was the longest sentence she'd spoken since arriving, and Sam felt something warm bloom in his chest. Trust, he realized. She was finally starting to trust him. But Cedar Falls wasn't ready to let them find peace. The first sign of trouble came disguised as kindness. Mrs. Henderson from the Church Ladies' Auxiliary climbed the narrow stairs to Sam's workshop carrying a basket covered with checkered cloth. "Thought you might appreciate some fresh bread," she said with the sort of smile that never reached the eyes. "And perhaps we could have a word about your houseguest." Clara froze at her workbench, a tiny screwdriver clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Sam stepped carefully between them, his bad leg aching from the morning's rain. "Clara's welcome here as long as she wants to stay," he said politely but firmly. Mrs. Henderson's smile tightened like a rope pulled too tight. "Samuel, dear, I'm sure your intentions are pure, but people are starting to talk. A young unmarried woman living with a bachelor. Well, it just doesn't look proper." "What people say and what's true are two different things," Sam replied. Of course. But appearances matter in a God-fearing community." Mrs. Henderson set the basket on Sam's workbench with a thud that rattled his tools. "The girl needs proper guidance. Female guidance. Perhaps a position in service with a respectable family." Clara's breathing became quick and shallow. Sam had seen that same look on cornered animals during his hunting days, the desperate calculation of flight versus fight. "Thank you for the bread," Sam said, moving toward the door with obvious intent. "Clara and I have work to finish." Mrs. Henderson's mask of Christian charity slipped just enough to show the steel underneath. "This isn't over, Samuel. The town council has concerns. Legitimate concerns about moral influence and proper Christian behavior." After she left, Clara sat trembling in her chair like a leaf in a windstorm. "They want to send me away," she whispered. "They want a lot of things," Sam said, settling onto his three-legged stool. "Doesn't mean they get them. You don't understand." Clara's voice cracked like thin ice. "When people decide your trouble, they find ways to make it true. They'll say I stole something or that I tried to seduce you. They'll make up stories until everyone believes them." Sam studied her face, the high cheekbones that spoke of hungry nights, the eyes that held too much knowledge for someone barely 20 years old. "What really happened with your stepfather?" Clara went still as stone. For a long moment, the only sound was the tick of clocks from around the workshop. "Harold Wickham married my mother when I was 15, she said finally. "Ma died of fever that first winter. Left me alone with him in that big house on Elm Street." Sam's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. "What did he do? What men like him always do to girls with nowhere to run." Clara's words came out flat, empty of emotion. "But I got smart after a while. started putting laudanum in his evening whiskey. Just enough to make him sleep heavy. That's not seduction, Sam said fiercely. That's survival. Try telling that to his drinking friends when they found him passed out in his own vomit one too many times. Clara laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. Easier to blame the wicked stepdaughter than admit their friend was a monster. The pieces of Cedar Falls' favorite gossip story rearranged themselves in Sam's mind, forming a picture that made his stomach churn. A 15-year-old girl, orphaned and trapped with a predator. A town that chose the comfortable lie over ugly truth. "Where did you go when you left?" he asked. "Denver first, then Kansas City. Worked in factories mostly, but..." She shrugged. "Word follows you in small circles. Someone always knows someone who knows your story. Only it gets twisted with each telling until you don't recognize yourself anymore." Sam thought about his own story, how it had changed in the 3 years since he'd returned from war. The heroic wounded soldier had gradually become the strange recluse, the object of pity who made people uncomfortable with his limp and his silence. "Why did you come back?" Clara's smile was sad as autumn rain. "Ran out of places to run to. Figured if I was going to starve, might as well do it somewhere familiar." Before Sam could respond, the sound of multiple footsteps on the stairs made them both freeze. This time, the voices were different, deeper, more official. Mayor Hutchins appeared in the doorway, flanked by Sheriff Davies and Dr. Matthews. The mayor's considerable belly strained against a vest that had seen better days, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "Samuel," the mayor said with false friendliness, "thought we should have a chat about your situation here." "What situation?" Sam stood slowly, his weight balanced on his good leg. Sheriff Davies stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Got reports of disturbing the peace. Neighbors complaining about strange noises, odd behavior." "What neighbors?" Sam asked. "Nearest ones are Morrison's, and they're below us." "Well now," Dr. Matthews spoke up, his voice carrying the authority of education and respectability. "That's not really the issue. The issue is the young lady's mental condition." Clara pressed herself against the far wall, her eyes wide with familiar terror. "Her mental condition is fine," Sam said firmly. "Is it?" Dr. Matthews pulled a leather satchel from under his arm. "Because I have here a signed statement from her former guardian, Harold Wickham, detailing episodes of violent behavior, theft, and moral degeneracy. Legal grounds for commitment to the state asylum." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Clara made a small sound in her throat, barely human. "Wickham's not even in this state anymore," Sam protested. "But his sworn testimony is," Mayor Hutchins said smoothly. "Arrived just yesterday by telegraph, along with a request that we ensure the girl receives proper medical attention for her difficulties." Sam's mind raced. This wasn't about morality or proper Christian behavior. This was about power, the power of respectable men to dispose of inconvenient truths and the women who carried them. "She's not going anywhere," he said quietly. Sheriff Davies' hand moved closer to his weapon. "Now Sam, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Girl's clearly unstable. Look at her." All eyes turned to Clara, who stood pressed against the wall like a trapped animal, shaking and pale and everything they expected a mad girl to be. But Sam saw something else in her eyes, not madness, but calculation. The same sharp intelligence he'd glimpsed that first day. "Clara," he said softly, "tell them what you told me about the pocket watch spring." Clara blinked in confusion. "What?" "About how different breaks have different moods. How metal talks when you know how to listen." Understanding flickered across her face. She straightened slightly, some of the terror leaving her posture. "The spring in Mr. Aldrich's watch," she said, her voice growing stronger. "It wasn't wound too tight like he thought. It was bent from moisture. Old moisture, probably from when he fell in Miller's Pond last summer. Metal remembers trauma, even after you think it's been fixed." Dr. Matthews frowned. "What does that have to do with?" "And Mrs. Cooper's music box," Clara continued, warming to her subject. The cylinder wasn't off-center. One of the tiny pins had been pushed down, probably by her granddaughter's curious fingers. You have to feel for the one that's singing flat, then coax it back to true pitch with just the right pressure. The three officials exchanged uncertain glances. This didn't sound like the ravings of a madwoman. Furthermore, Clara said, her intelligence now blazing in her eyes like flame, Dr. Matthews, you have a pocket watch that's been running slow for months. I can hear it from here. The problem isn't the mainspring, it's condensation under the crystal. Probably started when you spilled coffee on it during the Henderson baby's difficult birth. Am I right? Dr. Matthews unconsciously touched his vest pocket, his face pale with shock. How could you possibly know that? Clara smiled, and for the first time since Sam had known her, it held no fear at all. Because I listen, she said simply, and broken things tell the truth, even when people won't. The silence stretched like a held breath until Mayor Hutchins cleared his throat uncomfortably. Well, he said, this changes things. But Sam could see in their faces that it didn't change anything at all. If Clara wasn't mad, she was dangerous. A young woman who saw too clearly, who refused to disappear quietly into the shadows where inconvenient truths belonged. And that, Sam realized, made her far more threatening than madness ever could. The scream that split the November air wasn't Clara's. It was Sam's. He stood in his workshop doorway, blood dripping from his knuckles onto the wooden floor. Three men lay scattered around his workbench like broken toys. Clara crouched in the corner, clutching a small hammer, her eyes wide with shock. What happened here? Sheriff Davidson pushed past Sam, his hand resting on his gun belt. The lawman's face was grim as he surveyed the destruction. Overturned tools, shattered glass, and Tom Brennan groaning on the floor with a clearly broken nose. They came for her, Sam said quietly, flexing his bleeding hand. I came home and found them cornering Clara like she was some animal. Billy Morrison struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip. That girl's a menace, Sheriff. She attacked us with that hammer when we just came to talk. Talk! Clara's voice shook with rage instead of fear. You called me a whore and tried to drag me outside. The third man, Pete Carlson, nodded eagerly. She's lying, Sheriff. We heard she was spreading stories about Harold Wickham. Decent folks can't have that kind of poison in town. Sam's jaw tightened. Harold Wickham, the name that haunted Clara's nightmares. The stepfather who'd hurt her in ways that still made her flinch when doors slammed too loud. Sheriff Davidson looked between the bloodied men and the trembling girl. What stories? That he forced himself on her, Billy spat. Poor Harold left town in shame because of her lies. Now she's got this cripple fighting her battles. The word cripple hung in the air like poison. Sam's war injury had always made him an easy target for cruel tongues, but hearing it now, in front of Clara, made something dark and protective rise in his chest. Harold Wickham was a monster, Clara said, standing slowly. Her voice grew stronger with each word. He came to my room every night after my mother died. He said it was my fault for being pretty. Said I asked for it. Lies! Pete shouted, but his eyes wouldn't meet Clara's. Sheriff Davidson held up his hand for silence. These are serious charges, miss. Why didn't you report this when it happened? Clara's laugh was bitter. To who? Harold was the town's fire chief. Everyone loved him. Who would believe the orphan girl over him? Sam watched the sheriff's face carefully. Davidson was a fair man, but he was also practical. 3 respected townsmen against 1 scarred veteran and a girl with a damaged reputation. The math wasn't in their favor. She's got proof, Sam said suddenly, the words coming from somewhere deep in his gut. Clara's head snapped toward him, confusion flickering in her eyes. Sam prayed she would trust him, would play along with whatever plan was forming in his mind. What proof? Sheriff Davidson asked. Sam limped to his workbench and picked up Clara's sewing box, the one she'd carried when she first came to him. His fingers found the hidden compartment he'd discovered weeks ago but never mentioned. Show him, he said gently to Clara. Her hands trembled as she took the box. For a moment, Sam thought she might refuse. Then she pressed the small catch and the bottom panel slid away. Inside were 3 items: a torn piece of cloth, a tarnished silver button, and a folded letter. "This is from Harold's shirt," Clara whispered, holding up the cloth. "From the night I finally fought back hard enough to get away." The button bore the fire department's insignia. And the letter, Sheriff Davidson unfolded it carefully. His face grew pale as he read. "This is Harold Wickham's handwriting," he said slowly. "He's confessing to—" The sheriff's voice trailed off as he continued reading. Billy Morrison lunged for the letter, but Sam caught his wrist. "Don't," Sam warned, his voice deadly quiet. "What's it say?" Tom Brennan demanded, struggling to sit up. Sheriff Davidson looked at Clara with new understanding. "It's an apology, a confession. He admits to forcing himself on you repeatedly. Says he was leaving town because he couldn't face what he'd done." The workshop fell silent except for the tick of the clock Sam had been repairing. "Why didn't you show this before?" Sheriff Davidson asked gently. "Because I was ashamed," Clara whispered. "Because part of me believed what everyone said, that it was my fault somehow." Sam's heart broke for the scared girl who'd carried the secret for 2 years. He moved closer, offering his strength without words. Billy Morrison's face had gone white. "That don't prove nothing. She could have written that herself." "Harold's been sending money," Clara said quietly. "Every month. To the post office in Denver. Sheriff Davidson can check the records." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I will. But right now, we need to sort out what happened here today." Sam stepped forward. "They broke into my workshop. They threatened Clara. I protected her." "With your fists?" Pete Carlson muttered. "With whatever was necessary," Sam replied firmly. Sheriff Davidson studied the scene again. The broken glass, the overturned tools, the blood on everyone's hands. "You boys started this?" "We just wanted to talk to her," Billy insisted. "By breaking into my shop?" Sam's voice carried the authority of his military past. "By cornering a woman who's done nothing wrong? She's a liar and a—" Tom Brennan started to say. "Careful," Sam interrupted, his eyes dangerous. "Very careful how you finish that sentence." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Sheriff Davidson looked from the bloodied men to Clara, who stood straighter now, no longer cowering. "Here's what's going to happen," the sheriff said finally. "You 3 are going to leave. You're going to spread the word that Clara's told the truth about Harold Wickham. And you're going to stay away from both of them." "What about our injuries?" Billy demanded. "You got those injuries breaking into a man's workshop and threatening his friend," Sheriff Davidson said, glancing at Clara. "Be thankful he didn't do worse." As the 3 men limped out, Billy paused at the door. "This ain't over, Tinker. Town won't stand for this much longer." Sam met his stare without flinching. "Then maybe it's time to find a town that will." After they left, Clara sank into Sam's chair, her whole body shaking with delayed shock. "I never thought I'd tell anyone about the letter," she whispered. Sam knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Why did you keep it?" "Because somewhere inside, I hoped someday someone would believe me." She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "You made me brave enough to hope." Sheriff Davidson cleared his throat. "Miss, I owe you an apology. We all do. Harold Wickham fooled a lot of good people." "What happens now?" Clara asked. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Truth is, this is going to stir up a lot of anger. Some folks won't want to believe they were wrong about Harold. They might blame you for making them look foolish." Sam felt Clara tense beside him. "So she's still in danger?" "Could be. You both might be." Sheriff Davidson adjusted his hat. "You might want to think about leaving town, at least until things cool down." As the sheriff left, Sam and Clara sat in the wreckage of the workshop, surrounded by broken glass and scattered tools. The truth was finally out, but Sam realized it might have made them more vulnerable, not less. "Are you sorry?" Clara asked quietly. That you stood up for me? Sam looked at this brave, broken girl who'd survived hell and still had the courage to trust him. Never, he said firmly. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Cedar Falls in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. But Sam knew that underneath, the same old hatreds and fears were stirring. The real test was just beginning. Clara's hands wouldn't stop shaking, even 3 days after the confrontation. She sat at Sam's workbench, trying to repair a music box that had been smashed during the fight. The tiny gears kept slipping through her trembling fingers like water. Each failed attempt made her more frustrated, more angry at herself for being weak. It's not working, she said, pushing the delicate pieces away. I can't fix anything anymore. Sam looked up from sweeping the last of the broken glass. Your hands will steady when you're ready. Trauma takes time to heal. Time we don't have. Clara gestured toward the window. Have you seen how people stare at us now? Mrs. Henderson crosses the street when she sees me coming. The baker won't sell us bread anymore. It was true. Since Sheriff Davidson had spread word about Harold Wickham's confession, the town had split into 2 camps. A few people had apologized to Clara, shamefaced and awkward, but most had grown colder, angrier, as if her truth had somehow made them accomplices to a crime they'd ignored. Mrs. Sterling sent another telegram, Sam said, holding up the yellow paper. She wants to know if you'll come to Denver. Says she has work for someone with your skills. Clara had been avoiding this conversation for days. Mrs. Sterling's offer was generous. A chance to apprentice with real craftsmen, to build a life beyond Cedar Falls' narrow-minded gossip. But it felt like running away. What about you? She asked. Sam's answer came too quickly. I'll be fine here. This is my home. Your home is treating you like a criminal because you protected me. The truth sat between them like a heavy stone. Sam's business had dried up overnight. No one brought their broken things to a man who'd bloodied 3 respected citizens. The workshop that had been his sanctuary was becoming his prison. A knock at the door made them both freeze. It was too early for visitors, and these days, unexpected knocks meant trouble. Sam opened the door to find a small boy with a dirty face and nervous eyes. Mr. Hartwell? Ma says to give you this. The boy thrust an envelope at Sam and ran before either of them could speak. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting. Mr. Hartwell, my husband says I shouldn't write this, but I must. What happened to Clara happened to me too 20 years ago. Different man, same shame. I never told anyone because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Thank you for believing her. Some of us know the truth, even if we're too scared to say it. A friend. Clara read the letter twice, her eyes growing wide. There are others. Others who know what you went through, Sam said gently. Others who understand. But they're too afraid to speak up. Clara stood and walked to the window, just like I was. More knocks came throughout the morning. Each time, Sam expected angry townspeople or more threats. Instead, they found small gifts. A loaf of bread left on the doorstep, wildflowers in a mason jar. A note saying simply, "Thank you for your courage." By afternoon, Clara had received 7 anonymous letters from women who'd experienced similar attacks. Some were recent, others decades old. All carried the same message. They believed her, and they were grateful someone had finally spoken the truth. Look at this, Clara said, holding up a letter from a woman who'd been assaulted by her own uncle. She says she's been carrying the shame for 30 years. 30 years of thinking it was her fault. Sam watched Clara's transformation with growing amazement. The trembling had stopped. Her back was straight, her voice strong. Reading these letters had given her something he'd never been able to provide, the knowledge that she wasn't alone. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Clara was quiet for a long moment, staring at the pile of letters. "I'm thinking about Denver," she said finally. "But not for the reasons you think." Before Sam could ask what she meant, another knock came at the door. This time it was Sheriff Davidson, and his face was grim. "We need to talk," he said. They sat around Sam's small table while the sheriff explained the situation. Harold Wickham's confession had reached the territorial authorities. They wanted to reopen several old cases where young women had made similar accusations against respected men. "They're going to need Clara to testify," Sheriff Davidson said. "Her courage in coming forward has encouraged others to speak up." Clara's face went pale. "Testify? In front of judges and lawyers and the men who hurt you," Sam finished quietly. The sheriff nodded. "Some of these cases go back years. But with Clara's testimony, and these other women coming forward, we might finally see justice." "What if they don't believe us?" Clara asked. "Then you'll have tried," Sheriff Davidson said. "And that's more than these animals deserve." After the sheriff left, Clara sat in silence for a long time. Sam watched her face, seeing the war between fear and determination playing out in her expressions. "I have to do it," she said finally. "Don't I?" "You don't have to do anything," Sam replied. "You've already done more than enough." "But if I don't?" Clara picked up one of the anonymous letters. "This woman says her attacker went on to hurt 3 other girls. 3 other girls who might have been spared if someone had spoken up sooner." Sam understood then. This wasn't about Clara's healing anymore. It was about preventing others from being hurt. "The trials will be in Denver," he said. Clara nodded. "Mrs. Sterling said she'd help me find a place to stay. Said she knows lawyers who specialize in these kinds of cases." "And after the trials?" Clara looked around the workshop that had become her sanctuary. "After the trials, I want to open a school. Not for reading and writing for skills. For girls who have nowhere else to go. Girls like me." The idea was so perfect, so Clara, that Sam wondered why he hadn't seen it coming. She wanted to turn her pain into purpose, her survival into service. "What about us?" he asked quietly. Clara's face softened. "Come with me. We could do it together. You could teach the boys metalwork, I could teach the girls. We could build something that helps instead of just surviving." Sam looked around his workshop, the tools he'd collected, the life he'd built, the safe small world that had protected him from risk and growth and love. Then he looked at Clara, who was offering him a chance to be part of something bigger than his own fears. "What if I'm not brave enough?" he asked. "You're the bravest man I know," Clara said simply. "You stood up to 3 men to protect me. You believed me when no one else would. You've already shown more courage than most people manage in a lifetime." That evening, as they packed their few belongings, Sam realized that courage wasn't something you possessed. It was something you chose, moment by moment, decision by decision. "Are you scared?" Clara asked as they folded her few dresses into an old trunk. "Terrified," Sam admitted, "but also excited. I've never felt excited about the future before." Clara smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it reached her eyes completely. "That's how you know you're doing the right thing. When the fear and the hope are mixed up together." They left Cedar Falls on the morning train, carrying 2 trunks, a box of tools, and a stack of letters from women who'd found their voices through Clara's courage. As the train pulled away from the station, Sam saw Billy Morrison standing on the platform, his face twisted with anger. But Clara didn't look back. She was too busy sketching plans for their school, her hands steady now, her future bright with possibility. "What will we call it?" Sam asked, looking over her shoulder at the drawings. Clara thought for a moment, then wrote across the top of the page, "The Hartwell School for Second Chances. Because everyone deserves one," she explained. Sam nodded, understanding that this was how healing really worked. Not by forgetting the past, but by using it to build something better. They were both broken, but together they were becoming something stronger than either could have been alone. And that, Sam realized as the train carried them toward their new life, was what love really meant. Not fixing each other, but choosing to build something beautiful from the pieces of who they'd been. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years that felt like a gift instead of a threat. The crash of breaking glass shattered the peaceful morning in the Hartwell workshop, followed by Clara's sharp cry of pain. Sam dropped his tools and rushed to where she stood frozen, blood dripping from her hand onto the floor of their Denver workspace. But it wasn't the accident that made his heart race. It was the look of terror in her eyes, the same expression she'd worn that first day in Cedar Falls when the crowd had surrounded her. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, staring at the destroyed music box that had taken her 3 weeks to repair. "Mrs. Patterson will never forgive me. She trusted me with her grandmother's treasure, and I've ruined everything." Sam gently took her bleeding hand, wrapping it in clean cloth while his mind worked. They'd been in Denver for 6 months now, and their business was growing faster than either had expected. But success brought new kinds of pressure. Rich customers had rich expectations, and one mistake could destroy the reputation they'd worked so hard to build. "Accidents happen," Sam said quietly, but he could see Clara wasn't listening. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in memories of other times when breaking something had led to punishment. The workshop door chimed, and Thomas Chun walked in, their newest helper who'd come from the railroad camps with burns covering half his face. The other workers had laughed at him, but Sam had seen past the scars to the careful hands and quick mind underneath. "Miss Clara," Thomas said in his careful English, "the Patterson lady is here. She wants to see her music box." Clara went pale. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson wasn't just any customer. She was the wife of Denver's most powerful banker. Her approval could open doors to every wealthy family in Colorado. Her disapproval could close them just as quickly. "Tell her we need more time," Sam started to say, but Clara shook her head. "No more lies," she said, standing straighter despite her bandaged hand. "If we're going to fail, we'll fail honestly." Sam felt pride and worry battle in his chest. The Clara who'd hidden behind madness in Cedar Falls was gone, replaced by someone who faced problems head-on. But sometimes courage could be just as dangerous as cowardice. Mrs. Patterson swept into the workshop like a silk storm, her expensive dress rustling with each step. She was younger than Sam had expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Behind her came a man Sam didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the look of someone used to getting his way. "Mrs. Hartwell," Mrs. Patterson said warmly, "I hope you have good news about my grandmother's music box. Mr. Whitmore here has been eager to see your work. He represents several wealthy families back east." Clara took a deep breath. "There's been an accident, Mrs. Patterson. I dropped your music box this morning, and it's broken beyond repair." The silence stretched like a held breath. Sam watched Mr. Whitmore's face close off, saw Mrs. Patterson's smile falter. Their reputation, their future, their carefully built new life, all of it hanging on what happened next. "However," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger, "I have a proposal." She walked to her workbench and picked up a wooden box that had been sitting there for weeks. Inside lay the pieces of the destroyed music box, but also something else, small gears and springs made of silver and gold, crafted with a skill that made even Sam's breath catch. "I can't give you back your grandmother's music box," Clara said, "but I can give you something new. A box that plays the same melody, built with techniques I learned from my mistakes. It won't be the same object, but it will carry the same love." Mrs. Patterson reached for one of the silver gears, holding it up to the light. The craftsmanship was beyond anything Sam had seen, even from the master jewelers they'd visited. "This is remarkable," she whispered. "The detail work is extraordinary." Mr. Whitmore leaned forward, his business mask slipping to reveal genuine interest. "Who taught you to work at this level?" "Pain," Clara answered simply, "and someone who believed broken things could become beautiful." Over the next hour, Clara explained her techniques while Sam and Thomas demonstrated the tools and methods they developed. Mr. Whitmore asked technical questions that would have stumped most craftsmen, but Clara answered each one with growing confidence. Finally, Mrs. Patterson stood. "Mr. Whitmore, what do you think?" "I think," the man said slowly, "that my clients in New York need to see this work immediately. Mrs. Hartwell, would you consider taking on a commission for the Astor family?" They're looking for someone to restore a collection of European music boxes damaged in a recent fire. Sam felt the world shift around them. The Astor family meant connections to the wealthiest people in America. It meant success beyond anything they'd dreamed. But Clara was frowning. How long would I be gone? Gone. Mr. Whitmore looked confused. Oh, you'd need to travel to New York for the initial consultation. Perhaps 2 months to complete the work there. 2 months apart. Sam tried to hide his dismay, but Clara caught it immediately. In the 6 months since leaving Cedar Falls, they'd never been separated for more than a day. I need time to think, Clara said. After the visitors left, the workshop felt too quiet. Thomas had gone home, and Sam found himself alone with Clara for the first time in hours. She sat at her workbench, turning a broken gear over and over in her hands. This is your chance, Sam said finally. The opportunity we've been working toward. Our chance, Clara corrected. We built this together. But you're the one with the real talent. I'm just Dash. Stop. Clara's voice was sharp. Don't you dare finish that sentence. I've listened to you talk yourself down for months, and I won't hear it anymore. She stood and walked to where Sam was organizing tools, her movements quick with anger. You think I don't know what you sacrifice every day? How you take the difficult customers so I don't have to face their judgment. How you handle the business side because you think I'm too fragile. How you pretend your leg doesn't hurt when you spend extra hours standing, so I can sit and work. Sam opened his mouth to protest, but Clara wasn't finished. I was broken when you found me, yes, but you were broken too. The difference is, you've been so busy fixing me that you forgot to fix yourself. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Sam sank onto his work stool, feeling the weight of months of hidden exhaustion. What if I fail? He asked quietly. What if I can't keep up with what we're building? Clara's anger melted into something softer. She took his scarred hands in hers, her touch gentle despite her bandaged palm. Then we fail together, she said. And we start again. That's what partners do. Outside, Denver's evening lights were beginning to twinkle. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle called, promising journeys to places they'd never imagined reaching. The New York opportunity, Sam said finally. What do you want to do? Clara smiled, and Sam saw in her face the same determination that had carried them both through their darkest moments. I want to write Mr. Whitmore a letter, she said, and tell him that Hartwell and Associates works as a team. If he wants my skills, he gets yours too. If that's not acceptable, there are plenty of other wealthy families who might be more reasonable. Sam stared at her, amazed. The timid girl who'd hidden behind madness was gone completely, replaced by someone who knew her worth and refused to apologize for it. You're really willing to risk it all? Sam, Clara said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Haven't you learned by now? The biggest risk is playing it safe. As if summoned by her words, a knock came at the door. Sam limped over to find a young boy holding an envelope with the Patterson family seal. Inside was a note from Mrs. Patterson and something that made both Sam and Clara gasp. A bank draft for 3 times their usual fee, along with a request for Clara to teach metalworking classes to the wives and daughters of Denver's elite. It seems, Clara said, holding up the check with shaking hands, that breaking things sometimes leads to bigger opportunities than we ever expected. But as Sam looked at the amount written on the draft, a new worry crept into his mind. Success this large would bring attention they'd never faced before. And attention, as they'd learned in Cedar Falls, could be more dangerous than poverty. The question was, were they strong enough now to handle whatever came next? The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, but would end with Sam and Clara facing the hardest choice of their new life together. Clara was teaching her 3rd metalworking class to a group of Denver society ladies when Mrs. Patterson burst through the workshop door, her face flushed with excitement and something that looked like fear. Clara, dear, you need to see this immediately, she gasped, holding out a newspaper that still smelled of fresh ink. It's about you. Both of you. The headline made Sam's blood run cold. Denver's mysterious metalwork masters. The truth behind the Hartwell success story. Below it was a detailed article about their past in Cedar Falls, complete with quotes from Billy Morrison and others who painted Clara as a manipulative woman who'd seduced her way into Sam's protection. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the page was a smaller story that made Sam's hands shake. Harold Wickham found dead in San Francisco hotel. Local police investigating. Clara read over his shoulder, her breathing growing shallow with each word. Wickham had been found with a letter in his pocket, a confession about what he'd done to his stepdaughter, written in guilt and desperation before he'd taken his own life. "He's dead," Clara whispered. "After all this time, he's finally dead." The society ladies who'd been chattering over their metalwork had gone silent, their eyes bright with the kind of hunger that fed on other people's secrets. Sam could practically see them calculating how this scandal would affect their own reputations. "Perhaps," said Mrs. Vandenberg, the mayor's wife, "we should postpone today's lesson, given the circumstances." One by one, the women made their excuses and left, taking their gossip with them like weapons. Within an hour, the workshop that had been buzzing with activity felt hollow and abandoned. Clara sat at her workbench, staring at the newspaper without really seeing it. "It never ends, does it?" she said quietly. "No matter how far we run, no matter what we build, the past always catches up." Sam wanted to comfort her, but his own mind was racing with practical concerns. Their biggest customers would read this story. The New York opportunity might disappear. Everything they'd worked for could crumble because of other people's judgment and Harold Wickham's final act of destruction. A sharp knock interrupted his worried thoughts. Thomas Chun stood in the doorway, his burned face serious with concern. "Boss," he said in his careful English, "there are men outside asking questions. They say they're from newspapers in San Francisco and Cedar Falls. They want to know about Miss Clara and the dead man." Through the window, Sam could see a small crowd gathering across the street. Word traveled fast in Denver's tight social circles, and scandal traveled fastest of all. "We could leave again," Clara said suddenly. "Pack up and disappear before this gets worse. Start over somewhere new." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sam looked around their workshop, at the tools they'd collected, the projects half finished, the life they'd built with such careful effort. Starting over meant abandoning everything, but staying meant fighting a battle they'd never wanted. "Or," said a new voice from the doorway, "you could stand your ground and let the truth speak for itself." They turned to see Judge Harrison McCall, one of Denver's most respected citizens, standing with his hat in his hands and sympathy in his eyes. Behind him was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, one of the few female doctors in Colorado, and Father Miguel Santos from the Catholic Church. "Word travels fast in this town," Judge McCall said gently. "But so does the truth, when good people choose to speak it." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, her medical bag in one hand and a folded paper in the other. "I've examined women who've suffered what Clara suffered. The signs are unmistakable, and any doctor worth his degree would recognize them. Harold Wickham's confession only confirms what anyone with sense could see." Father Santos nodded gravely. "I've counseled many victims of such abuse. The shame belongs to the perpetrator, never the victim. Any community that would punish a woman for another's sins is a community that has lost its way." Sam felt something loosen in his chest, a tightness he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. These weren't just customers or business associates. They were people who'd seen Clara's character and chosen to defend it. "There's more," Judge McCall continued. "Mrs. Patterson has been busy this morning. She's called on every family you've worked for, reminding them of your skill and integrity. Several have already sent letters to the newspapers defending your reputation." Clara looked up for the first time since reading the article, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle in wind. "Why?" she asked. "Why would they fight for us?" Dr. Mitchell smiled. "Because, my dear, you've shown half the women in this city that they can create something beautiful with their own hands. You've given them confidence they never knew they had. That's worth defending." Over the next several hours, their workshop became something Sam had never expected. a gathering place for people who decided that character mattered more than scandal. Mrs. Patterson returned with a group of her friends, all carrying their metalwork projects and determined to continue their lessons despite the gossip. Thomas brought his friends from the railroad camp's men who knew what it meant to be judged by appearances rather than actions. Judge McCall stayed to help answer questions from the persistent reporters, explaining Colorado law regarding libel and slander in terms that made several of them reconsider their stories. But the real surprise came near evening, when a telegram arrived from New York. Mr. Whitmore had read the newspaper story, along with Harold Wickham's confession. His message was brief but clear. Character revealed under pressure. Offer stands. When can you start? Clara read the telegram 3 times before showing it to Sam. They still want us, she said, wonder in her voice. Even knowing everything. Especially knowing everything, Sam corrected. It takes strength to survive what you survived. That's not scandal. That's proof of the kind of person you are. As the supporters gradually left and the workshop grew quiet, Sam and Clara found themselves alone with a decision that would shape their future. The New York opportunity was real, but so was what they'd built in Denver. They could go east and work for the wealthy, or stay west and continue teaching others to find their own strength. What do you think? Clara asked, settling beside Sam on the bench they'd built together from scraps of expensive wood. Sam looked around their workshop one more time, then at the woman who'd taught him that healing was something 2 people could do together. 6 months ago, they'd been refugees from their own past. Now they were teachers, business owners, and most importantly, partners who'd learned to trust each other completely. I think, Sam said slowly, that we have something here worth more than any commission. We have people who believe in us, work that matters, and a chance to show others that their past doesn't have to define their future. Clara nodded, her decision made. New York has plenty of craftsmen, but Denver needs what we're building here. She walked to her workbench and began drafting a letter to Mr. Whitmore, declining his offer but suggesting several other skilled metalworkers who might serve his clients well. As she wrote, Sam felt a deep satisfaction settle in his bones. They'd faced their worst fears today: exposure, judgment, the threat of losing everything they'd built. But instead of destruction, they'd found community. Instead of shame, they'd found support. Instead of running again, they'd chosen to stay and fight for the life they wanted. 3 years later, the Hartwell Workshop had become something neither Sam nor Clara could have imagined. Their teaching programs had expanded to include injured workers, women seeking independence, and anyone else who needed to learn that broken things could be made beautiful. The newspaper article that had threatened to destroy them had instead brought students from across the country, people who wanted to learn from teachers who understood that true skill came from overcoming adversity, not avoiding it. On this particular morning, as Sam watched Clara guide a young widow through her first metalworking lesson, he realized they'd accomplished something far more valuable than wealth or fame. They'd created a place where people could discover their own worth, regardless of what the world had told them they deserved. Ready for the next student? Clara called, and Sam limped over to meet a nervous young man whose left hand had been crushed in a mining accident. I don't know if I can learn this, the man said, staring at his damaged hand. Sam smiled, remembering another man who'd once thought his wounds made him worthless. Son, he said gently, the best teachers are the ones who've had to learn how to put themselves back together. You're in exactly the right place. As the lesson began, Sam caught Clara's eye across the workshop. She smiled back, and in that moment, he understood the most important thing they'd learned. That true healing didn't come from forgetting the past, but from using its lessons to help others find their own strength. Outside, Denver continued to grow and change, but inside their workshop, broken things became beautiful every single day. And that, Sam knew, was the most revolutionary act of all, refusing to accept that anyone or anything was beyond repair. The worth of broken things, they'd learned, wasn't measured by what they'd lost, but by what they chose to build from the pieces that remained.